The Riddler's by far one of our favorite supervillains from DC Comics. As an obsessive mastermind who loves to incorporate puzzles and mind games with his crimes, the Riddler's theatrical gimmicks make for a fantastic antagonist. With time, his backstory revealed a traumatic past in the comics that made him the mastermind he is. In this video, we'll talk about how Riddler's trauma was portrayed by none other than Paul Dano himself, so stay tuned. First up, let's talk about what Paul thinks of the Riddler. Now, if we think about the villains intertwined with Batman's story arc and Gotham City in general, you'll have to agree that most of them were pretty heavy hitters. But in between the real-world grifting, unchecked greed, and theft, in comes the Riddler, who's really just a crazy guy who enjoys being smart and loves a good mean puzzle. Now, coming back to what Paul thinks of the Riddler, back in 2019 when the 38-year-old actor was first cast as the main villain of the Matt Reeves 2022 movie, we had our reservations. We knew Paul's fantastic and loved him as Dwayne Hoover in Little Miss Sunshine, but we'd been looking forward to Robert's Batman for years, and obviously we're looking forward to a great villain arc. But thank God Reeves came through, because we honestly think no one could have done a better job than Paul. Yup, even Jim Carrey. More on that later, by the way. Matt's approach to the movie was rooted in a detective story at its center, and what better person for the job than the Riddler? While speaking on Variety's Actors on Actors series, Dano shared what it felt like to portray the villain. He revealed that his character was like two sides of the trauma. It was also the first conversation he'd had with his director about how Bruce Wayne comes from a rich background, and that Edward Nashton basically had nothing. Add in the fact that Edward was only ever given positive feedback upon solving a puzzle or riddle, so that piles up to a lot of unresolved issues that translate to trauma. Coming up, did you know Paul lived away from his family for a Riddler scene? As we just mentioned, the conversation Paul and Matt had before diving headfirst into his role as the Riddler brought a lot of perspective to him as an actor. To everyone else, the Riddler might just seem like someone who's scarily obsessed with puzzles and riddles, but for someone who only felt validated because of his problem-solving skills, it makes you wonder how that obsession developed. Dano recalled that going through all of this really made him stop and think to himself. He realized he had to separate the space between himself and his characters because the lines had started to get a bit hazy. He also shared that he has a hard time going to bed if he has a book about trauma or serial killers next to him, so for the big scene at the end, Paul actually had to get himself checked into a hotel room away from his family to not let his mojo be affected by any intrusive thoughts. The Batman actor also said that none of this had to be mixed, and if we're being honest, it makes sense for him to take such a step. DC's got its way with villains, and knowing how dark they can get, it's understandable if the actors want to take a breather and separate themselves from their craft. Matt Reeves has always been upfront about how much depth Dano added to his Riddler, and seeing how he's written a spin-off comic for the villain all by himself, it's nice to see how invested and careful he is regarding the character. You don't see it often. Up next, here's why we think Dano's version is the best Riddler. All aboard the Paul Dano train, folks. It's no secret that we've loved his spin on the character. After all, we've been talking about it for quite a while now. But if we compare the live-action movie to the comics, then Riddler's flamboyant and campy outfits paired with his theatrical crimes really colored his storyline as a villain. In some depictions, the Riddler has been portrayed as a harmless villain who doesn't pose much threat to the Dark Knight, but here's where things get interesting with Dano's version. Matt Reeves had imagined his movie's villain as a serial killer plaguing the city of Gotham. He had completely revamped Paul's Riddler and made him take a route that's a lot different from Jim Carrey's Riddler. We remember Jim's Riddler as fun, light, and playful in Batman Forever, but this new Riddler looks rather menacing. But this is where Paul's version of the new Riddler works so well. Considering the brooding atmosphere in the film that has followed since Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, we don't think a goofy Riddler is going to blend in well now. Paul's acting has set up the Riddler to come off as someone who dares to be much more realistic and frightening. Modeled after the Zodiac Killer, Dano's character is riddled with complexity and, dare we say it, eerily sympathetic too. The actor's childlike face almost seems bone-chilling, juxtaposing his serious crimes, and if you combine that with his level of intellect, trauma, trauma and orphan background, then you've pretty much got a cardboard cutout of Bruce Wayne, who's chosen the dark side. Following up, let's talk about what Jim Carrey thinks of Paul's performance. Like we just talked about, Jim Carrey's playful Riddler's a complete 180-degree opposite of what Paul's brought forth to the screen, and it looks like the Mask actor agrees that the new movies are certainly a darker version of the story. He also shared that while he loves Paul and thinks he's a tremendous actor, he also has mixed emotions about how Dano's Riddler leaves his mark on his victims. Considering how influential movies can be and how people often draw inspiration from them, Jim's only concern with the movies was how some sickos out there might adopt these new methods of torture, his words not ours. Carrey also said he has a conscience about the things he chooses, and while he believes the movies are well done, it's just not his kind of thing. Moving on, as we know, to portray an emotionally wounded character on screen requires a lot of patience and mental gymnastics. To be able to switch between your own self and a character with a tragic backstory is one of the toughest things to do. Up next, we'll talk about what Paul Dano and Brian Tyree Henry think about acting trauma and not letting portraying the Riddler affect real life. Starting off with the Riddler's tragic backstory that took a toll on Dano, if we look at the recent Batman, the story reveals Nashton always carrying a book of crosswords or other puzzles around the halls with him, and because of this, he was dubbed as Ed Weird and was subjected to a lot of bullying in school. He ends up working a food delivery job as an adult, and on his way to work every day from his orphanage, he comes across a picture of Thomas Wayne alongside his wife Martha and their son Bruce, which sparks immense jealousy in him because of the future Caped Crusader. In the movie, the other orphans from Nashton's orphanage would joke about how rich Bruce was and call someone Rich Bruce if they felt they were overly spoiled by their wealth. Putting his skills to use, Edward decides to study forensic accounting, and it turns out for him it sounded a lot like solving puzzles. This sort of precipitates him to think about Bruce Wayne all the time, and he's pushing forward to make his own way against him. Now, if we look at all of that from a bird's eye view, it pieces together the cause of Riddler's obsession. Born into misery and misfortune, he uses his skills to avenge someone who hasn't done anything to him personally. But his privilege of being born with everything Edward's ever wanted takes a toll on him and leads him to don the mask of the Riddler. Up next, Dano struggled with his own mental health in the past too. Before he took on a role as mentally challenging as the Riddler, Paul also experienced something similar on the set of Prisoners. Dano explained that he initially didn't want to step into the role of Alex because he was worried about how it would affect him mentally, but later he found a way to make it work. So it makes sense that he was careful to tread around the waters for Batman. As someone who immerses himself fully into the roles he's playing, and we're talking wrapping themselves in bubble wrap to avoid leaving behind any evidence as the Riddler, it's kinda cool to see how much he cherishes his craft. But more than the roles he portrays, Dano values his mental health a lot more. He knows the value of separating the art from the artists, and ever since the movie Prisoners, he's learned to use his physicality as a way to protect himself from his mental health. He found a way out for his mental health and adjusted how he held his body and jaw even. That helped him tremendously, and he was able to step in and out of his character's molds with ease. Last but not least, can we expect to see Paul's Riddler anytime soon? If you're waiting for your fix of the Riddler, you might just have to make do with Dano's comics for now, but while he was promoting his comic a couple of months ago, the actor expressed his interest in returning to the Batman series as Edward Nashton soon, if there's an open door. While there's not much of Edward that the actor took home with him after shooting because of how he felt about the character, he does admit that he's explored more of Riddler while writing the comic book series. He also shared that not a lot of his attention has gone towards the future of the character as a live-action role, but he's hopeful that it will someday. And that's a wrap for this video, my friends. What do you think of Paul Dano's portrayal of the Riddler? Do you think he did justice to the character? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Please make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos just like this. Until next time, we'll see you soon.